Good morning and good afternoon and good evening, everyone. Welcome to today's really timely webinar on the tobacco industry and corruption. So my name is Andy Roll. I'm from the Tobacco Control Research Group at the University of Bath, and we are one of the partners in the Stop Global Tobacco Industry Watchdog. I'm chairing today's panel. So hopefully in the world of Zoom, it will run smoothly. Anyway, so I'd like to thank ACCA and our partners in Stop GGTC for helping organize today's webinar. A warm welcome to our audience. We have over 200 participants registered for today, and also a really warm welcome to our global panel of experts. So today promises to be a fascinating and informative, and as I've said, timely event. As the world emerges from a COVID lockdown, many people believe we have a once-in-a-generation chance to reshape business to make them much more ethical and much more transparent. But for anyone who investigates the tobacco industry, often the opposite, is true. We face a secretive and devious opposition. So the industry has decades of obfuscation on health or delaying legislation and bullying governments. And let's not forget that it kills 1 in 2 long-term users. But today's focus is, are we facing a corrupt industry? And if we are, what can we do about it? And so let's find out from our our wonderful panelists. But first, some housekeeping for you. Please keep microphones off if you're not speaking. And for the audience, there is a question and answer function. So, please feel free to post questions. We will try and answer them. And the more concise, your questions, the better. Keep those questions coming. So without further ado, can I introduce you our keynote speaker, Jonathan Cushing is head of program from Transparency International Health Initiative. Jonathan joined Transparency in September 2019 and is responsible for the development and implementation of projects working to strengthen transparency and effectiveness of health systems in a number of countries. So over to you, Jonathan.
Thanks, Andy, and good afternoon, good evening, and good morning to everyone. First of all, it's an honor to be invited to this meeting, and it's really great to see so much interest in tackling corruption around the tobacco industry. I must confess, I was slightly apprehensive when we were approached to be a keynote speaker. I know very little about corruption in the tobacco industry, not least in comparison to some of the panelists who are talking today. However, as Andy mentioned, at Transparency International, we are a global movement trying to eradicate corruption in all sectors and for everybody around the world. And my work focuses very much on addressing corruption in the health sector globally, and in doing so, ensuring transparency in the sector. And I think within the health sector, we often see the very kind of real impacts of corruption playing out on people's lives, with requests for bribes to access services, the diversion of medicines into the private sector, meaning that people who need care don't always get it. But on the other hand, we also know that a lot of corruption in the health sector is opaque. It's very difficult to understand and then to unpick the kind of behind the scenes manipulation, the lobbying, manipulation of data, which results in poor health outcomes for people. We don't know the impact of corruption. If you're good at corruption, you obviously don't get caught. And it's very difficult to quantify it on people's lives. Some research from 2011 estimated that 140,000 children die annually as a result of corruption. And this is clearly too many and shocking, but it's probably the tip of the iceberg. What we know, what we see as the corruption in the health sector, but there are also many corrupt activities and events or efforts to subvert, efforts to improve the social determinants of health That is, the factors such as ensuring that people have clean air, clean water, or don't smoke that determines people's health. And the impact of those efforts are much harder to quantify. Why do I mention this? Because I think on reflecting on the work that's gone on to stop corruption in the tobacco industry and reduce the influence of big tobacco companies, there's a lot to be proud of. We've come a long way over the past years. Personally, as a child, I remember adverts for tobacco products, and as a student, kind of recall coming back from nights out stinking of secondhand tobacco smoke. My children will never experience that. And they all grow up in a world where they aren't exposed to those influences. And beyond the kind of personal influences, there's a lot to be proud of. We've seen the framework on tobacco control, the first treaty of the WHO, and that's been a major achievement. And I think certainly from a health sector perspective, the work of the tobacco kind of attempting to control the tobacco industry has had impacts beyond just controlling tobacco. We're now left and have a better understanding of the extent to which companies will lobby and engage in underhand tactics to ensure profit. And many of the lessons that we learned in the fight against the influence of big tobacco are now being taken and used to try and stem the influence of other big industries, such as big pharma and big oil, in their efforts to put profit before the lives and the healthy lives of populations. That said, it remains an uphill struggle and more needs to be done. And we at Transparency International did some work last year looking at lobbying within the EU. And you can see, for instance, that of the kind of 4 million available annually to big tobacco to lobby, about 1% of that is available to those fighting against big tobacco to lobby. We've come some way in ensuring that there are beneficial ownership registries to ensure that interactions are disclosed, but all too often they're not adhered to, and lobbying registers aren't complete and are not adequately enforced. I think looking forward as well, what we see is that as tighter regulations have been put in place in higher income economies, there's been a shift by big tobacco towards expansion in new markets, where in countries where regulatory and oversight mechanisms are not as strong, it's often easier to influence. Whilst there have been some prosecutions brought in the UK and USA under foreign bribery acts, this is like for bribery and attempts at bribery in other countries. This is likely to be the tip of the iceberg. And going forward, we need to ensure that all countries globally have the right capacity and legislation to ensure that they're not seen as easy pickings, and that those most vulnerable in the world don't fall victim to the influence of big tobacco. I'd like to conclude there and say that I'm really looking forward to and learning from the discussions over the next hour. I'd like to hand back to Andy and let him introduce the panelists. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jonathan. That was, I think it's really good to set the scene for today's discussion. Before we go round to the round table, I'd like to now introduce Alessia Carantola. Alessia is an award-winning journalist, investigative journalist at the Organised Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, and she's been doing some really great investigations on the tobacco industry, which I'm sure we're just about to hear. And she's a co-founder and board member of the Investigation Reporting Project in Italy, and a member of the ICIJ, the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. So over to you, Ale.
Thank you, Andy, and thank you to you all for this invitation. I'm working with OCCRP, and I'm going here to present a little bit what we've been working on in over the past 1 year and a half, almost 2 years, with my organization. So I'm going to start the presentation speaking about what happened some years ago. So are you, yes, so previously we start from the first part. So some years ago, in 2008, OCCRP, the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, collaborated with another consortium, ICIJ, that led a project called Tobacco Underground. in this project, they investigated the illicit traffic in cigarettes in several countries. As the outcome of the project, we've seen a series of stories from Montenegro to Ukraine and up to China. So in this project to which many journalists from around the world collaborated, there was an investigation that in the end revealed how the same tobacco industry was involved in several cases of smuggling cigarettes. And so this is a project that, in case you haven't looked at, I would suggest you to this page, the reportingproject.net, where you can find all of the stories that has been reported by journalists in 2008. So smuggling, regulatory capture, tobacco corruption, counterfeiting, these are all the topics and that came out during the investigation. So this happened in 2008. Today, in 2019, OCCRP decided to follow up with another tobacco project. We started around the beginning of 2019. The name is Loose Tobacco. And what is about? Loose Tobacco is again another project that is investigating big tobaccos. In particular, we are trying to find out how are countries implementing the treaty, the FCTC, and how big tobacco is trying to undermine it. So this is the framework, let's say, of our work. And what are the objectives of this project? So the objective, again, are that of trying to find the new tactics used by big tobacco, the tobacco industry, to expand its market all over the world. So we've seen what happened in 2008, and we are seeing today that some of the tactics are the same, they're just changing some of their some aspects and disguise, but they're substantially, in many cases, the same. And so we have again smuggling, we have again counterfeiting, we have again lobbying at the political level, use of CSR money for supporting cultural, political, economic activities, all against what is established by the FCTC regulations. In particular, Article 5.3 of the FCTC. What are the methods that we use? We do research basically on public available data. This is in many cases the beginning of most of our investigations. We do interviews with key sources that can be tobacco control experts and other sources that are provided or that we find during our meetings and during our research. And then a lot of FOI requests. That is a tool very useful, not only for journalists, but especially for us, because it's providing us some of the basic that from which we start for our investigations. So this is about the method. What are the stories? What did we find? We have found several stories. Thanks to a team made up by OCCRP reporters that are from several countries in the world, from Asia to Latin America. And we have also several projects that have been carried out in partnership with media from around the world, Europe, Latin America, Asia, Japan. So from Japan to Mexico, we have been working with a series of colleagues who focused on specific topics. And what are the stories that we've been working on? So we decided to work on clusters of topics that mainly gave birth to two big projects. One is Without a Trace, about the track and trace system implemented in Europe and partly in other countries in the world. And the second biggest project is Blowing Unsmoke, which is about an heated tobacco product that has been sold all over the world, but showing cases of corruption and on attempt to manipulate with a misleading campaign the effects of this product. And then we've been working on specific singular stories, like, for example, cigarette smuggling funds militants in West Africa. You can find our stories under occrp.org at under the page of Loose Tobacco, where we collect all the investigation that we've been working on over the past 2 years on this topic. Next step. What are we? So we've been working until now, thanks to, as I said, to these sources, and we came out with some investigation that ended up also in providing some important material for not only tobacco control researchers, but also to some politicians, because our stories, our reports have been used also as at the political level to try to raise the issue of tobacco taxation, for example, especially regarding HTP. And I can mention specifically, but not only, the case of Italy or Romania, and where still this debate is ongoing, and where our investigation are contributing to the public debate. In some cases, our reporting are used also for trials where the tobacco industry is accused of corruption or other misfact. So this is some of the results that we had thanks to our work. But you know, it takes time, so most of them we will see what is going to happen thanks to the work we've been doing, also thanks to the collaboration and the many of you that were also helping as sources for our research and work. We will see that I think in the long term. We will keep investigating what is happening in the tobacco world, and we will do it also thanks to your help. So how can you help you? How can you help us? This is my final request. So if you have information and you think that you have useful details that it can be shared with us journalists, please link to us. We have a page which is occrp.org, Loose Tobacco, with a secure platform for sharing information, also anonymously. So if you have anything, please contact us. We will be happy to take your information into account, analyze them, and to work on new stories on the tobacco, big tobacco in the future. So thank you so much for your attention. Hope we can stay in touch.
Thank you so much, Ale. That was, again, really, really informative. I'm just trying to keep an eye on both the chat and questions. There was a question from Manfred to actually to Jonathan, if you don't mind. Well, actually, both of you could maybe answer this one. And Manfred wants to know, could it be possible to force the tobacco industry to open their bank accounts and to follow the path of the money to politicians and the media? So I don't know if Jonathan or Ale, one of you wanted to respond to that. Can we follow the money that easily?
It's a dream. Let's hope more. That would be great. I mean, I don't think it's that easy, but what we can do, especially us, and I want to specify what is also our role as journalists, is just that of exposing what is wrong. We then stop at that point, and we have to leave to, I mean, our goal is that of opening discussion, public discussion on the topic, and then we have to leave to politicians or to the judicial system and to advocates, tobacco, anti-tobacco advocates to do the rest of the work. So we stop at the level of just denouncing, exposing, let's say, what our sources, our proof, evidence are showing us.
Okay, thank you, Ellie. And can I remind participants, if you can post questions in the Q&A box rather than the chat, that'd be helpful from our end to try and keep things running smoothly. Jonathan, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that, or should we move on? Okay, I think we'll move on. So we're going to have a roundtable discussion. And I'm going to pass the baton on facilitation to my old friend, Professor Lacan. Prof Lacan Youssef is the Deputy Chancellor for Research and the Director of the African Observatory, known as ATIM, at SMU University in South Africa. He's well published internationally, and he's a recognized leader in tobacco control, not only in Africa, but around the world. So it's my great pleasure to hand over to the Prof.
Thank you, Andy. We now move into the next session. As part of efforts to get to understand the kind of tools and materials that are available to frame the issue around corruption, and also get some insight into some practical ways that NGOs and governments have been able to respond. For this session, we've got 4 speakers. I'm going to introduce them. They will speak for about 2.5 minutes each. And then in the second session of it, I'm going to pose another question for them to respond to. So in the first half of this, I'm going to have Andy Rowell, who is a senior research fellow at the University of Bath and director of the tobacco tactics team at Tobacco Control Research Group, which is a partner, of course, to the Global Tobacco Industry Watchdog STOMP. Then I'm going to have Chris Bostic, who is HASH's Deputy Director for Policy and has been working in the Global Tobacco Control since 2000, when he attended the negotiation for the Framework Convention of Tobacco Control as a civil society international expert. In his current position, Chris oversees the development and implementation of HASH's program, including human rights, tobacco endgame, and legal liability. That would then be followed by Mrs. Almas Jafrina from Indonesia Corruption Watch. Mrs. Almas is a researcher at Indonesia Corruption Watch, an NGO that focuses on anti-corruption and democracy issues in Indonesia. She has worked in ICW since 2013 and was previously with the Political Corruption Division for more than 6 years before leading the Public Service and Bureaucracy Reform Division. And lastly, we're going to have Commissioner Mary-Ann Mendoza from Help Justice Philippines. Mary-Ann Fernandez Mendoza has been in public service for more than 40 years. She held various key positions in government. Her last posting as a commissioner of the Civil Service Commission, one of 3 constitutional offices whose mandate is to ensure meritocracy, professionalism, accountability, and promote moral efficiency, responsiveness, progressiveness, and courtesy in the public service. So we do have distinguished speakers to take us on how we could address this in a practical form. So to start with, I'm going to invite Chris Bostic, and of course, I'll call in turns without any further introduction, the next speaker. Chris, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Lacan. And thanks to the organizers too it's a privilege to be part of this discussion, a very important discussion. I'm going to be going over 2 US laws that could be used to curtail industry interference, both in the US and around the world. But let me start by briefly underlining the context for tobacco control in the US, because it's like in many things, we're a little weird. First, we have not ratified the FCTC, and there's no sign that we're going to be doing so anytime soon. Our health department says that we are in compliance with the treaty, but that's clearly not true. Second, the U.S. Constitution has a very strong free speech clause, and that means that a lot of tobacco industry actions that would be criminal in other countries are legally protected here and are constitutionally protected. So there's not much that we can do about it. We can't just litigate against it. In particular, political donations have a very strong impact here, especially at the federal level. And a lot of federal agencies still treat the tobacco industry as a stakeholder. And there are industry representatives on several important advisory councils in the United States. And then finally, we have a federal system, which means that tobacco policy is undertaken at the national, state, and local levels. So there are literally thousands of points of entry for the tobacco industry to influence policy, although their power is much stronger at the federal level than it is at the local level. So the 2 laws that I want to go over very briefly, I'll start with the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, or FCPA. This is a long-arm statute that allows the federal government to prosecute individuals or corporations for illegal acts like bribery that are committed entirely outside the United States. This has been used against the tobacco industry, most notably about 10 years ago against a group of tobacco leaf companies for bribery in multiple countries. Unfortunately, that case was settled for such a small fine that it has had very little impact on industry behavior, but it could be used more strongly. And the second law that we have here that might be used is the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, or RICO. And this law is actually aimed at organized crime, so like mafia or drug cartels. But in 1999, a case was brought by our Department of Justice against the tobacco industry under this law for fraud and for bribery and a lot of other things. This is the biggest civil suit in the history of the world. I think that's still true. And it's still ongoing, but mostly it is over. They did start a criminal case also at the same time, but that was dropped. So the court did find that the industry had violated RICO and implemented some severe penalties for them, although not enough to actually stop them. The most important aspect of that case for our work here in the U.S. is that the industry has now been adjudicated as racketeers, as organized criminals, and basically mobsters. And we have found that at least at the local level, when politicians or decision makers understand that, they're far less likely to deal with them. So those very briefly, those are the 2 laws that might be used internationally, and I'll be ready to answer questions. And thank you again.
Thanks, Chris. And now we move to Andy, who will be discussing the BAT case in UK Serious Fraud Office with regards to prosecuting corruption that has occurred in low and middle income countries. Over to you, Andy.
Thanks, Prof. Yeah, so in 2015, the University of Bath, we acted as consultants to a BBC program, Panorama, which was entitled The Secret Bribes of Big Tobacco. And we looked at the activities of BAT in Central and Eastern Africa. And we got hold of some documents from an ex-BAT whistleblower, which revealed that BAT was basically paying bribes to public officials. It was paying bribes to MPs, and it was paying bribes to damage rival local tobacco companies. And the program was aired in November 2015. And the following morning, the whistleblower walked in to see the Serious Fraud Office and or the SFO, as we call it, and then the SFO began to look into the activities of BAT. And after a preliminary investigation. The SFO upgraded its inquiry into a criminal investigation in August 2017 it was. And we saw this was a really hopeful sign that, things were progressing against BAT. But in January this year, after a 5-year investigation, the SFO suddenly dropped its case, arguing that the evidence did not meet the criminal bar for prosecution under UK law. Now, without wanting to get into the specific details of UK legislation, from talking to legal experts here, the UK Bribery Act actually remains very largely untested in case law for companies the size of BAT, and the guidance surrounding the law is actually quite complicated. But essentially there has to be a material gain to the parent company, i.e. BAT Globe House in London, for them to sort of see a sort of criminal prosecution. And also a sort of a complicating factor within the Bribery Act is that actually if you have anti-bribery policies, that acts as a mitigating factor. And I'm sure BAT was saying to the SFO, hey, look at all our wonderful glossy anti-bribery policies, aren't we the good guys really? Despite the SFO decision, it's not the end of the matter. The SFO did say they will continue to offer assistance to ongoing investigations for other law enforcement partners. And from BAT's annual report, we know the company is also under investigation for by the DOJ for sanctions busting. In its annual report, buried deep in page like 200 or something, it says the group has been investigating and is aware of government authorities' investigations into allegations of misconduct. The group is cooperating with those authorities, including the US Department of Justice and Office of Foreign Assets Control, who are conducting an investigation into suspicions of breach of sanctions. And it says it's still cooperating with the SFO. And then it says the potential for fines, penalties, and also other consequences cannot currently be, assessed by BAT. So it's, BAT's not in the clear yet. And, but what we do know is basically when we're dealing with a size, a company as complex and the size of BAT, and also with the financial muscle of BAT, the odds now seem like it's quite difficult, to bring a criminal case within UK jurisdiction. And so that means that, we must look at other ways of bringing BAT to account. And, one way, this is great, this seminar is happening, this webinar is happening, is how do we cooperate together to hold BAT to account? Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. I'm going to move then swiftly. As we all know, some low and middle income countries have strong anti-corruption measures that could be used to deal with the tobacco industry corruption. And a significant NGO and government collaboration have allowed strong responsive actions to be taken in Indonesia and Philippines. So we would hear from colleagues from these two countries on how they've been able to deal with this, starting with Mrs. Alma. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Lekan. I'm going to share some notes on political corruption in Indonesia Parliament and how has ICW responded to it. I have some presentation. Okay, then I will jump in a little bit about the tobacco industry's interference to the Parliament later. So it is well known that political corruption harm many sectors, and in Indonesia Parliament, it mostly related on budget drafting and then regulation drafting, public procurement, and the last is supervision. And the question is why these problems occurs. It can be simply said that there are two main causes. The next slide, please. Two main causes. The first one is corruption by greed, and the second one is corruption by need. And related with corruption by need, in this context of political corruption, is we face a major problems called the high cost of politics. So it is known in Indonesia, and I'm sure not only in Indonesia, the election cost is really high, and also to maintain the constituent and fund the political parties. In Indonesia, actually, the political parties highly depend on their member regular and incidental contribution, because the allocation budget from the state is really small. So the political parties really depends on their members' contribution. Next. And on this part, the tobacco companies on tobacco industries can enter the field powerfully by giving legal or illegal donation and formal or informal donation, because the political parties and the politicians needs money for fund the elections and for fund the political parties. So in here, there is abusive donation potential to becoming abusive donation from the tobacco industries. Next. And in Indonesia, there is no regulation that limit the donation from the tobacco industries. The problem is because the tobacco industry is perceived as a normal business. So they are legitimate political donors. They are also legitimate stakeholders in policy-making process. Next slide. In 2018, Indonesia Corruption Watch made a research related with tobacco industries and parliament, and we find at least 4 tobacco interference in the parliament. The first one is they sent formal hearing requests to be involved or invited in tobacco bill draft hearing. It happened in 2009 and in 2010, but we sure that probably it still continue until today. And then the second one, they also submit their interest to the NGOs and then association and academic institution that have relation or connection with the tobacco industries. And the third one is there are various forms of sponsorship, including organized social activities like CSR and then charity, together with politicians in the politicians' constituencies. And sure, it will lead or it will bring something like political benefits to the politicians. And the fourth one, what I mentioned before, they probably becoming political donors or supporters. There is no clear evidence about the donation from tobacco industries to political parties and the parliament or politicians, because in Indonesia we face a problem that even though the political parties and politicians have to submit campaign finance report and political parties financing report to the KPU, to the election commission bodies or to the state, but there is no guarantee if they report it honestly to the state, the expenditure and stuff. So yeah, even though there is no clear record on the report, it possibly they give donation to the parliament or the political parties in election or post-election. Next. And then this is just ICW interview the member of parliament in 2018. They say that they didn't receive any donation from the tobacco industries, and they commit to not accept it in 2019 elections, last election. But because they already aware that it leads to conflict of interest, but like I mentioned before, there is no guarantee if they really didn't receive any donation from the tobacco industries, because there is no monitoring activities from the state. There is no guarantee that the report is complete. The report provide complete information about the expenditure, about the donation from the companies. Next one. And what we have done to fight political corruption and to minimize the tobacco industry's interference in Indonesia, basically it's a challenging work, because the main actors behind this type of corruption, the political corruption, have all the powers, that is policymakers. But we continue to carry out monitoring work, monitor the elections, and then provide political education, education platforms, such as to remind the public on the importance of to check the track record of elections candidates, and to monitor the performance of law enforcement bodies. And what should be done? I agree that we have to protect the parliament and also government officials from tobacco industry influence. But I believe that it must be started from the elections and party funding, such as donation ban, and then political parties and campaign finance report, and transparency, and also monitoring system. Because without clear regulation, without restriction in election and political parties area, it is hard, or it is quite impossible to minimize the influence of tobacco industries. And then the second one, I believe that we have to strengthen the government and parliament code of conduct to limit the interaction with the tobacco industries. That's it. Thank you, Lekan.
Thanks, Almas. I'll just go straight then to invite Commissioner Marihan Fernandez Mendoza to take the floor for 2.5 minutes. Thank you. Commissioner Mary, you're on mute. Can you switch on, unmute your mic? Commissioner Mary?
Okay.
Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Now I can hear you. Can you put on your video?
Oh my God.
We can hear you. Just only switch on your video, start your video, and also unmute yourself. Yes, we can see you now. Can you now unmute yourself and you can go on?
But I cannot see myself.
Yeah, it's okay. We can see you and we can hear you.
Okay. Greetings from the Philippines, and also congratulations to the organizers for bringing the discussion on tobacco industry and corruption to the global arena within the context of the UNCAC. The Philippines is viewed by the tobacco industry as the strongest lobby in Asia. So to this day, the tobacco companies remain very aggressive, powerful, and influential. Fortunately, the Philippines has very strong and anti-corruption laws and policies. There are institutions like the Ombudsman to prosecute corrupt acts, and the Civil Service Commission to ensure that government employees observe the code of conduct and ethical standards. The Joint Management Circular is intended to prevent and deter the tobacco industry from interfering and undermining health policies. The JMC has become a model policy and practice, often cited in the discussion of Article 5.3 of the FCPC. The JMC is the outcome of the combined efforts of civil society and government agencies such as the Integrity Office under the Health Ministry and the Anti-Corruption Office under the Office of the President. So what have been accomplished? The JMC has denormalized the industry's attempt to exercise undue influence through the so-called CSR. There has been a decline in the press releases of newspapers on tobacco donations. At the height of the pandemic, the CSOs have alerted the Health Ministry, who reminded its officials to reject these donations. Also, anti-corruption tools were developed through a UNDP technical assistance program to help government agencies formulate their action plans. A training on public service ethics and accountability continues to be implemented. The Ombudsman and the CSC are reviewing procedures to speed up the prosecution process. The capacity building of CSOs continues to be undertaken. The Departments of Education and Social Welfare, which are the usual targets of tobacco donations, have issued strict rules warning employees not to receive tobacco donations. Certainly, the tobacco industry has been severely threatened by the country's progress in implementing Article 5.3. 10 years after the JMC adoption, the industry continues to attempt to have it revoked. So what more needs to be done? Both CSOs and the government need to work together and to do more to sustain these gains. There is need to mobilize CSOs from various sectors such as women, youths, parents, patients, academia, and medical experts. The role of the media must be strengthened. And lastly, the general public should become more aware of instances of tobacco industry interference and report this in their communities. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much. We now have, I would like to pose a question to the panel. Now we see that a variety of mechanisms exist to address tobacco industry interference and corruption. Why is it then that despite the persistent reports of undue influence and corruption of the tobacco industry, these mechanisms are not as widely utilized as they should be? What would you recommend as a way forward? I would like to start with Andy.
I mean that's, it's a good question, isn't it? It's like, sometimes, even if we're stepping back from sort of corruption, even if we're just looking at tobacco industry influence, you've got Article 5.3 of the Framework Convention, and that, even if that, that is basically trying to protect health policy from the influence of the tobacco industry, and so even if nation states who'd signed up to it and ratified the convention implemented 5.3 in an effective way, that would be a really good starting point. Part of the problem, though, is what we're seeing now increasingly, in part as a response to the Article 5.3, is the industry's operating not just as itself, but it's operating through a front group. So, or it gives money to the Foundation for Smoke-Free World, that then gives money to other groups, and then gives, so it's like a second front group, or a front of a front of a front group. I'm not saying this is corruption. I'm just saying this is influence. So when we get to corruption, it gets even harder. There are, powers and laws, and it would actually be really nice to see a regulatory authority, from either the, the US or the UK, actually, have the muscle and, and take on one of these big companies. To go back to what Chris was saying, a little bit like they did with the RICO case back in the 90s,
Thank you. Perhaps just also linked to that, one of the questions asked by attendees is, you've already answered a part of the question around why there's not been investigation around PMI and the influence it exerts through the Smoke-Free Foundation. Another important question I see here, perhaps to ask the panel, linked to my original question, is to what extent, what do we do? How do you follow the money? Considering that the industry hides behind accountants and behind banks and behind law firms. How do you follow the money and get a conviction? Chris, do you want to take a stab at that?
Sure, I'll take a stab. I'm not an expert on finances, but I do know that the United States, when they have the political will, the government has the political will to go after wrongdoing, what they've often done is look at the choke points in international finance. There are a few cities that a lot of the world's transactions go through, and New York is one of them. And so sometimes, even if it has nothing to do with the United States, except that it came through a bank in New York, our prosecutors can then jump in and then say, okay, that gives us jurisdiction. And now we can go in and have probable cause, get a judge's warrant to go and investigate those transactions. I'm not sure if that's true in other financial hubs, such as London, but maybe Andy knows.
Does any panel member want to also add to that?
I mean, I think it's, if you look at BAT, we've had we've had the Serious Fraud Office investigation. There's also been press reports that there've been, an HMRC investigation and also a City of London Police investigation. That's 3 statutory investigations into the company, and nothing's happened. There's so many ways you could sort of look at this. Another issue we haven't really talked about today is smuggling and the complicity of the industry in smuggling or tax evasion. And again, the amount of evidence out there is overwhelmingly compelling. And Alessia's colleagues at the OCCRP did a great story recently on BAT and complicity in smuggling in West Africa. And yet it's kind of met with deafening silence by the regulatory authorities. It's kind of, why isn't someone interested in this? It's great that the Americans are supposedly investigating BAT for sanctions busting, but that's quite a small kind of slice of the pie of the activities of which BAT is currently, involved in. I don't know if Ale wants to talk some more about that. Just why aren't regulatory authorities, is this industry too big to fail? Are these companies too powerful? I don't know.
So maybe we should just keep this for the questions and answers later. This is quite exciting. There's so much to talk about. You just open another piece of this. For this session, I'd just like to wrap up as we run out of time. That essentially we established that the law exists to hold industry accountable. The fact that industry was not prosecuted in the UK does not mean BAT is clean. In order to prevent corruption, it should start already with the election of government officials by educating the public. You don't wait till when they get into office. And it's important for Article 5.3 to be implemented to have training of civil servants and get them sensitized. This has been quite informative, and I really thank all the speakers, the panelists. And for those who pose questions, we would have time at the later on to respond at the time of questions and answer. Thank you very much. Over to you for the next topic, Andy.
Thanks so much, Prof. Yeah, so we're going to move on to the next section, is sort of what more can be done, sort of practice in responding to stories of corruption. And I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Fabrice Ibe, who is the Executive Director of Anke in Togo and the National Contact for Transparency International in the country. And he works as a consultant for several organizations, including ECOWAS. Over to you, Fabrice. Fabrice, we can't hear you. Fabrice?
Thank you so much,
Okay.
Andre, and good morning, everybody. I work as national contact for Transparency International and involved both in national, international, and regional level in the fight against corruption. So, as you may know, corruption in the health sector, please next. Corruption in the health sector is a global pandemic. And of the 7.5 trillion spent globally on health each year, about 500 billion is lost to corruption. And also globally, an estimated 7% on health spending amounting to the 500 billion per year is lost to corruption and fraud, according to serious study carried out by UFO, is an organization based in Finland. So the Article 8, paragraph 4 of the UN CAC applies parties to establish, to take measure and system to facilitate the reporting by the public official act of corruption. I really think that there is a link, a direct link between the UN CAC. When I'm talking about the UN CAC is the UN Convention against Corruption. There is a link between the UN CAC and Article 5.3. I don't have time to go into detail, but what I just want to say is that both aim at protecting public health from vested interests of corruption. And the Article 5.3 aim to protect TC policy from the tobacco industry, while the Article 8, paragraph 2 of the UN CAC demand to parties to apply code of conduct, standards, norms for the correct, honorable, and proper performance of public functions. So you can see that there is a direct link between the two conventions, and including the fight against corruption in global public health advocacy or tobacco control advocacy will make more impact. Next. So, as corruption now is a global pandemic, how to tackle corruption? Generally, in the health sector and in tobacco control. As you know, as part of Transparency International, I just want to share with you this tool that Transparency International has developed since 2003, which aims at empowering individuals and families to safely report corruption when they see it happen. And Transparency International developed a tool called the Advocacy and Legal Advice Center. And globally, there are 100 offices open in 60 countries in the world. And in Togo, where I'm based, we have 3 centers, operational centers. So, ALAC, please, next. ALACs are composed mainly of 3 activities. So we sensitize people to let them know about the negative effect of corruption. So we organize several, we use the media, we use the video, article, a lot of activities. So last year, you can see what we are down here about, we have done about 50, we wrote 50 articles, we produced 50 videos, etc. So we do a lot of media activity so that people knows about what corruption is and how to contact. Please, next. And then we do also another component, activities of alert are mobile alert. What is mobile alert? Mobile alert is decentralized alert. So our staff, composed of lawyers and several volunteers, we travel from a district or city to another one. So they meet people, and then from the field, they collect collection cases. So people come and they complain about their corruption cases daily, what is happening to them, and then they seek for advice. And then from the field, our lawyers came with several cases. So you can see here, last year we have done about 3,100 alerts, where we met a lot of people. Can we move again? Next. And from the field, people report about corruption cases. They can also, we have online tools, so website, Facebook, we have a toll-free number. People can come to visit our centers, and then we sign a confidentiality agreement between the alerts and the victims of witness corruption. And then our colleagues, our lawyers, analyze, classify. When we believe that this is a serious corruption case, then we decide what to do. What to do is sometimes we meet both people, we trying to conciliate. If there is a compensation, we try to do it. If it is a big cause of corruption, then we report back to the high authority against corruption. Please go to the next slide. So we link people directly. And last year, we have linked people to the high authority against, we linked 5 cases of corruption. And among the 50 cases of corruption, and among those 50 cases of corruption, 3 were sent to the courts. And if I tell you, these are big corruption, road corruption. It was there was also a big case of corruption regarding the use of funds linked to football, and now they are in the courts, and several people, among which old ministers, premier ministers, so they are involved. And then we are working on these cases now with the high authority against corruption. Please, next. So what I want to say is that this tool can also be used in tobacco control. You know, I've been involved in tobacco control. I've done about 15 years in tobacco control. And our serious problem, particularly in Africa, is that you are lobbying, you are advocating for a law, and people are there. They try to corrupt government officials, and your law is not moving. I want to share something with you that personally, when I was advocating for the tobacco control law in Togo in 2010, I was in the National Assembly, where tobacco industry, composed of BAT, of Philip Morris, and other people, Chinese tobacco groups, networks, they come to the National Assembly, where the committee was discussing to adopt the law, and we went with the government to put 70% health warning. They said no, they do not have technology, and they came with somebody very strong. That was a powerful man who accompanied to the National Assembly, and they said they cannot implement Article 11 of the FCCC because they do not have technology, and it was removed. I tried, I do my best. I use the media, but until now, it was removed. And Togo does not yet have graphic health warning. You can see the impact of corruption in tobacco control. That's why using a tool like ALAC, why you empower the communities to know what corruption is, to report corruption, to follow up, and even necessary to work closely with national authority to bring those people to the court seems to me to be a tool that we can adapt to support tobacco control around the world. Please, next.
Fabrice, sorry, we're gonna have to, can you wrap it up? So, yeah, because we're running over. So if you could wrap up, that'd be great.
Please.
If you could, yeah, wrap the talk up because we're running over for time. So it'd be good if you could sort of nearly finish your talk, please.
Okay, I have 5 minutes, so I still have some time.
We're running over on time, so if you could sort of maybe do your final thoughts, that would be good.
Okay, please. This is some reference. If you want to learn more about the UN Convention, the impact of corruption, and available data, please go to these references. Please, next. So thank you so much. If you are interested, you need more information about corruption and health, please, I'm available to respond to your questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Fabrice. That was very informative. And moving swiftly on to sort of synthesize everything we've been talking about, I'd like to introduce Léonce Sassou, who is the Executive Secretary of ACCA, a Pan-African civil society network. And over to you quickly, Léonce. And if we can keep to time, that would be great.
Yeah, thank you, Andy. I really thank all the panelists here for your contributions. The details, the information we have today are really great. Thank you for this productive webinar. First, from Jonathan, I can say that we noticed that there's a lot to be proud of when it comes to achievement in tobacco control, and there is a good progress in terms of tackling tobacco industry in different strategies. But we have the tobacco industry that's heavily interfering today, and corruption is a tactic they are using, that they are taking this to low and middle income countries, especially seeing this part of the world as the new market. And this is where they have seen good ways in engaging in briberies, in those countries where they have weak legislation. We have Alessia, she highlighted the work of OCCRP and all the initiatives that have been undertaken so far to monitor and report on tobacco industry activities in corruption. We have the recent one is the Lose project that is started in 2019. These to investigate countries' implementation on the FCTC and big tobacco efforts to undermine the FCTC. She also requested that we all collaborate, to share information, and they have a platform where we can get in touch with them to share details or information that we have. She also shared some major corruptions topic that they worked on. Chris, in the roundtable with Professor Lekan, Chris, and Andy and Almas, I think that was that session with Chris shared with us the US government effort. They have legal policies there, and this protect the countries from tobacco industry, activities in corruption, while meanwhile these legal instruments exist. They end up with levies, and they are not strong enough to change the tobacco industry behaviors in the country. So they at least help to label the industry as racketeers in the country. Andy highlighted the BBC Panorama reports, which investigated the bribery cases in Eastern Africa in November 2015. And all the follow-up with the UK Fraud Office investigating BAT, even though it dropped the case early this year. BAT probably lobbied the SFO, branching what they claim, to do in the anti-corruption domain. So the fact that SFO dropped the case does not mean it's over yet. The current legislative context seems to make it difficult to bring BAT to book. So we need to brainstorm again. There is a lot again to do to make BAT accountable, but there's a room to move on this. Alma shared the practices in Indonesia, and Indonesia, we can notice that there is interference. The industry interferes during budget drafting. They engage in corruption. But this is mainly due to very low state budget. Political parties, they rely heavily on partners, funds from partners, which makes it possible for industry to bring donation and eventually corrupt politicians. The tobacco industry is considered in Indonesia as a legitimate partner. So they are allowed to partner in organizing some social activities or sponsorship activities. This also, she highlighted that there's no reporting from politicians on funds that they received, and there's no evidence to call on politicians of what they received from the industry. There's the monitoring is also there's a lack in monitoring all this in Indonesia. She highlighted the possibility today in Indonesia to elevate the effort in monitoring the industry and monitoring with the politicians to get data. We have Commissioner Mary, and that's the case from Philippines. And we have strong entities in Philippines that ensure that the industry does not undermine health policies in Philippines. Here, the efforts make it difficult for the industry to penetrate the government and engage in corruption. So there is, we can see that in Philippines, from this experience, that there is a combined effort from government and civil society to limit industry interference. And anti-corruption tools also developed by the government have this. Lastly, from Fabrice, Dr. Ebe highlighted the corruption as a global pandemic, as also Jonathan in the beginning said. So they said that we have a huge number of children that die as a result of corruption health system, and there's a money, going a lot of money that we are losing there. He highlighted the UNCAC, that the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, and make the link between the convention and the WFCTC. So the two conventions, we can see that both are protecting public health and tobacco control from corruption. So there is a strong link that we can harness on. This also, he shared with us tools from Transparency International. That's the practices and tools they have that help engage the community in collecting information, collecting data on on corruption. And he said that we can adapt those tools when it comes to monitoring or collecting data on tobacco industry corruption practices, we can adapt this tool, the ALAC tool, with in our effort in tobacco control. We can see that this is through the empowerment of individuals, so it's coming to community to participate in this effort, which is really great. I thank you for your time today in sharing all this, and it's my pleasure to take note and give this synthesis. Thank you very much, Andy.
Thank you so much, Leonce. That was a really good summary. Thank you.